Hi, everyone. Good morning. Welcome to day 2 of the Sloan Sports Analytics Conference. My name's Amanda Steibel. I'm a first-year MBA student here at MIT Sloan, and I'm excited to introduce our next panel, Skin in the Game, Sports Gambling's Emergence in the U.S. On today's panel, we have Sharon Otterman, CMO of William Hill US, Andrew Ashenden, CCO of Perform, Doug Kazarian, sports betting analyst at ESPN, Kip Levin, president and COO at FanDuel, and Matteo Montevardi, US president of Sportradar. Our moderator today is Jeff Ma, who is currently the SVP of Product and Analytics at Duetto. Our panel will last 45 minutes with 10 minutes at the end for questions. If you'd like to submit a question, you can do so through Twitter using the hashtag #bettingtowin. And with that, I'll hand it over to Jeff.
Thanks, Amanda. So the moment is here, the moment we've all been waiting for. I think I've been doing this panel in some way, shape, or form at Sloan for like 12 years. And every year we would say that sports betting is between 5 to 10 years away from being legal. With PASPA being overturned, sports gambling is now not illegal, and it can be approved basically on or legalized on a state-by-state basis. So the first question I want to throw out to the panelists, and any of you guys can respond, we can go one by one or whatever, but I want to know what you guys think this industry looks like in 20 years. Yeah. And what it's going to look like, if it's going to look more like fantasy sports or more like a regulated financial market.
I'm happy to kick it off. 20 years, it's going to be exciting to see what it looks like in a year. We haven't hit a year yet. I think in 20 years, it's going to look so much different because when you look at cultures around the world, the stigma is going to be out of sports betting, and it's just going to be part of our culture and what we do. So I don't think it's going to look like either of the two. I think it's going to be totally ingrained into the American culture. The stigma's not going to be out. We're going to see some William Hill logos on player uniforms. Like, it's going to be completely different than the way that it looks today.
Yeah, and I would add to that, it's going to be a very liquid market. So you have to assume that all of the states, in some way, shape, or form, are going to regulate, and hopefully that regulation will become more favourable over time. Equally, you'd like to think that actually there will be, the ability to bet, across boundaries, across state lines, and actually that will encourage a bigger pool of liquidity. And then, in terms of player habits, actually, you're going to see, I think, over time, sharper punters, because I think the environment's going to become more data rich, more analytics rich, and I think you're also going to see in the US in-play betting, which is 60, 70, 80% of turnover across sports books outside of the US, start to become a big part of the US ecosystem, and lots of turnover across those markets. And then the fundamental that I think we discussed backstage was a lot of focus is on domestic sport over here, but actually to really realise the potential of that liquidity, you've got to look outside of the US sport. So they're only on, between 12 and midnight over here, roughly speaking. Then there's half the day where you've got all sorts of other global sport where, people want to bet right across every hour of every day. Like we know that from every other market. So I think that's going to be a key part of the conversation. And, as we speak, the Premier League's on. There's no US sport on. La Liga's on. So I think that will change, but I don't think it's a question of one or the other. I think you're also going to have, player markets and player prop markets will obviously grow in prevalence as they have everywhere else in the world. So I don't think it's a question of financial trading or hobbyist. I think that the market will evolve so you satisfy the needs of both.
It's a great question because I think we're all trying to figure that out, whether it be media companies or providers exactly in the space. And anyone who says it with any sort of certainty what they think is going to happen or what they know is going to happen is lying, because this is uncharted territory. We want to find parallels, whether it be fantasy or something like that. I've been trying to think of, is it the gold rush? Is it fantasy? Is it maybe the internet arriving in the 90s? I don't think there's anything like this because it's so untapped on so many levels that we've discussed, because people are trying to figure out year 1 and year 20. But it is fascinating because we've seen sports evolved because of the consumer, right? The NBA finals famously in the 80s were tape delayed, right? And now everything's on your phone and all that stuff. So there really is no parallel to compare it to. But I think the focus is really on year one and how to monetize it, and from a media standpoint, what's the appetite of the consumer?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hard to predict out, but I think you can look at what's already happening in New Jersey as a good indicator. I mean, it's we launched the FanDuel Sportsbook app, beginning of September, and we always talked about it's going to take a long time for U.S. customers to get comfortable with in-play betting. I mean, we're already seeing north of 50% of our handle on NBA games in play. So it's already happening. I think the real question mark is how quickly states are going to regulate, and really regulate the same way that New Jersey has, which I think has set a really good standard and model, because a lot of the other states that are now going through the process of legalizing it are starting with retail only and so on. So it's really about how fast is mobile going to get, and mobile where you don't have to go, like in Nevada, to a retail location and sign up. How fast is that going to happen? And I think reality is, right, the size of the illegal market was absolutely all the predictions. I'd say now, definitely the higher end of that range looks like it's possible. And if it's going to go slow and retail only and so on, it's going to take a long time to convert those customers over.
Yeah, I believe that the preliminary indications that we have in New Jersey are really showing the trajectory where the consumer adoption is going, which is mobile and in play. I also believe that it's going to be more and more regulated. This is really, if we look at the gaming business as overall ecosystem, it's a highly regulated business, extremely regulated, more regulated than the financial markets, going back to your point. So regulation is going to be increasingly more important, not only integrity, but social responsibility, player protection, are going to be important agenda items that needs to be addressed by the gaming commissions. I also believe that the US has a different ecosystem. Meanwhile, we see in Europe a clear split between sports betting and the media business. I see these two verticals at one point converge. And I would be surprised if in 20 years you will be able to place a bet while you watch a game. Or you will see sports betting being one of the predominant content on the broadcasters. So these are, in my opinion, the two largest trends that will happen.
So I guess my question would have been better served to say, do you see it becoming more recreational or more financial? And like, what direction does it take?
To me, it's a form of gaming. Form of gaming is
recreational.
Not necessarily. When you look at the distribution of the players, typically 20% of the players are making 80% of the revenues. And these are
it's like
the big whales.
Any financial.
Any
always
financial.
A 20/80
so
rule,
to a certain extent, there is definitely that component will continue and will remain. We will be obviously more recreational aspects around the more casual players.
20% of people that you're making 80% of the revenue
Yes.
off, do you think those people will be recreational or more financially motivated?
I think we'll be more financially motivated.
Interesting.
Personally.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, if you look at our product, it's very much built for recreational customers, right? We do 250 bet types for every game right now in the NBA and the NHL and so on, right? That's trying to sort of gamify the experience, but certainly, if you look at our customer base, it's a mix, right? So there's a long tail of recreational customers, and we're seeing more and more recreational customers come in, as time passes. But certainly at the top end, there are people who are financially motivated and treating it like a market.
So it's interesting, Sharon, when you and I talked before, you mentioned that you thought the growth in this industry really would come from the recreational bettor, right? Do you want to talk a little bit more about that and sort of your approach or William Hill's approach towards catering towards that recreational bettor?
Yeah, look, as Americans who watch a lot of sports, we put a lot of hours into it, we know our stuff. And I think that the opportunity for sports fans to materialize their knowledge is entertainment now in the US, and put $5 on the game on the chance to win $84,000. That's what we do as sports fans. We judge odds every day, even before the way that we look at the world is through odds, and the way that we look at game. I knew Tom Brady was going to throw 500 yards. And I think that market of now that you can do it legally and safely is just going to continue to grow. And there's a big entertainment market out there for just around the sports fan itself.
But so it's interesting to think about the idea of these two juxtaposed positions where you're saying that you believe that like this 80%, this 20%, 80%, and Kip, you're saying that you believe that there's going to be these people that are financially motivated, which is different than the recreational angle, right? So how do we, which world do we think grows the overall? So ultimately, regulators care most about what? Like
Access.
Right, revenue, right?
Sure.
That's why we're doing this, I would assume, right? And they want money, and if the handle isn't big and we don't grow the overall industry, they're going to look around and they're going to say like, well, why do we even bother doing this, right? So what is, I would assume that the six of us all have some vested interest in this industry being successful. How do we think we grow that handle as quickly as possible?
I mean, the most obvious way is you need to create an environment where you're not disadvantaged versus the offshore, because that is where all the money is. I mean, and it's huge. And I think I was chatting about it with Kip just before this. Like, we can talk about this being a relatively nascent market, but actually, this is ingrained to a level within the culture already, where people are betting already, so they understand that. So the challenge is to bring all of that liquidity on shore, and the responsibility for that lies ultimately, to a large extent, with the regulators.
So sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just I would go back to the point that I already made, which is, states that are focused on tax revenue and going after the illegal market, they have to pass mobile. I mean, already in New Jersey, 80% of the handle in January was mobile.
So by going after illegal market, you're basically saying your main competition is the illegal market, so taking away from the illegal market. That actually segues...
And a crackdown on the illegal market, right? Like I would imagine the companies are targeting, I believe it's substitution effect, like they want to take away from the illegal market, because we see the numbers, right? So like the states that had legalized betting in the Super Bowl paled in comparison to the total money bet in the United States, incorporating offshore world and illegal market. So it would be to crack down on the illegal market if you want.
But that's like the wrong way to do it, right? Like if you're relying on the regulators to put these people out of business versus you innovating and making better products that take it away from them.
I think it's both.
But you have to have a level playing field in order to get rid of the illegal market, right? So tax rates need to be fair, right? There's states like Pennsylvania where the tax rate is so high, it's very hard to compete against the illegal market. Integrity fees are going to take margins away from bookmakers, and that illegal bookmakers don't have to pay integrity fees.
Can you explain integrity fee? Because some people might not know.
Yeah, so there's one school of thought that, from a content perspective, that the bookmakers should pay an integrity fee to make sure to the leagues, because the sports fans are betting on their product, that we should pay this tax, instead of figuring out a commercially reasonable way to work with the leagues to make sure that the numbers work for consumers, not just for the leagues themselves. So they want us to pay a tax to make sure that there's integrity. All of these taxes on the margin is going to give us an unfair advantage to the illegal bookmaker, who doesn't have to pay the taxes, doesn't have to pay integrity fees, and that makes it harder for us to compete. We want to compete on a level playing field because we want to keep consumers safe. If we keep consumers safe, we'll grow by volume. And there's a really big industry there, with recreational bettors alone.
We were talking a little bit about states. How many states have gone so far legal?
There's seven legal and
seven
operational and 7. Yeah.
Okay. Which ones are doing it right?
I think New Jersey is doing it quite well.
Why?
First of all, they have a good taxation that is not killing the bookmakers and allow them to generate margins. Second, they regulated mobile in conjunction with the retail, which is a very important component. And also I would say the licensing process, although typically the DG is a very difficult entity, has been quite smooth. So I think New Jersey is definitely a model that if we can see that replicated in other jurisdictions, we will see a significant adoption.
Which state is doing it the worst? And what have you guys seen that you think that the regulators have screwed up?
Well, I think that is going to be a progressive evolution. Mississippi today, for example, is only retail, and clearly...
that means you have to go in
you need to go into a casino to place a bet, right? And clearly that's limits dramatically, going back to what Keith was saying before, it limits dramatically the adoption. To see this business growing, you need to see mobile regulated. That is key.
And I think even worse, you actually have some jurisdictions now that are looking at retail only with a monopoly provider.
Like
right?
a lottery.
There's no competition, right? Like
I mean, it's like, in general, it's absurd, right? I mean, even just the idea that you need a retail shop to have them. I mean, imagine like you couldn't set up an e-commerce site unless you had a physical store. That's what they're basically saying.
But I think that there's something so important about retail. If you look at banks, right? There's been a lot of online banks. There's some times where you just want to go into the bank to see that there's a person there, your money's in there, you need to talk to somebody. And I think of having the opportunity to have both, that there's real people behind the counter in case you have a question. You want to deposit cash, you can go in there to do it. I think the magic is going to be a combination of online and retail. And I think each of these 7 markets, they're all completely different right now, but we don't really know what the future model is going to be. It's probably a hybrid of everything that exists right now.
No, I mean, I think New Jersey is it, right? Because you've got to have, as you said, reasonable tax rate. You've got to have mobile and retail. I do think retail is important, though we would be obviously a more mobile-driven and online-driven business. There is importance to the retail component, but they can't be tethered together, right? You can't be forced to go in there. And then you can't limit the operators. Like, there's got to be competition, because competition is ultimately going to drive innovation and great products for consumers and so on.
Yeah, so let's go back to this idea of growth in this industry and where the growth comes from. Because, you know, again, like if the goal of everyone on this panel today, we're going to say, is to sort of figure out how we're going to grow the handle as quickly as possible in the United States and make this all a reality. Does the growth come from the recreational bettor, as you know Sharon believes, or does it come from someone that's putting more money into the system, like an offshore book like Pinnacle might believe? Like, where do you think there's a place for both of those in the U.S., or do you think that really it's going to come from the recreational bettors?
I think there's a place for both. I mean, I'm a big believer in the large component of this is the entertainment value, and I think that it's about just sort of how it's viewed and how it's consumed in the United States. My understanding, you guys please correct me, is like the European model is that it's very much an entertainment or concession concept, right? You could, like we in the States go to games, leave without anything tangible. Like we go shopping, we come home with a pair of jeans, but we go to a game, we come home with an experience, or whale watching, or just something that doesn't have anything tangible. Betting is the similar concept, again, overseas in a market that's much further along, and spending $50 on a parlay ticket or a bet is the same as what we would probably process in the States is $50 on a bucket of beers, and with your friends and watching for two to 3 hours. And that entertainment value is not perceived as wasting money in overseas. And here it would be like, oh, I lost and wasted $50 on the game. So to grow that, I just think it's going to come in due time. But to your point, I mean, I'm fascinated with how legalization will evolve in something like New York, where you could have hedge funds, because a lot of people just want skin in the game, the name of the conference, but they may outsource.
But a hedge fund's not going to just want skin in the game. Hedge funds need to actually make money.
Correct, but you're right, so there's that component to it. But I do think that there will be people who want picks done for them, or they just want action on the games for the entertainment component, and want an email when they get home from work to like what their picks are, so they can watch the games with sort of a rooting interest. I do think that's going to evolve in a place like New York.
So Andrew, you've been involved obviously in a very mature betting market. Your company is sort of the leaders in providing a lot of the sort of data in that world. How do you see a world where the US can mature in a different way than Europe has, i.e., so as I think through this myself, my point of view is like, it's a kind of a no-brainer, right? If this became a financially more like a financial market, it would be bigger. Like, there's just no way that's not the case, right? Now, could it ever really be that is the question. Because like, you need just this sort of math, like you need about a lot more people betting $20 a game than one person betting 20,000. And if it's just handle that we're really striving for, what regulators care about, that's ultimately where we need to go. So is there a reality, or could you see a reality where this becomes more like a financial market where there are exchanges and things like that, and there is just a small commission being paid versus, real what's happening in the bookmaking industry?
I mean, I think if you've got the long-term view on, I think you have to say you can imagine that. And I think at the moment, there are so many barriers to that actually happening because of what we discussed in terms of state regulation, what you look at in terms of the Wire Act and prohibition of betting across states, and also the market that you're looking at, which is relatively immature in the sense that there's obviously been traditionally through places like Nevada, at least in the regulated market, a focus on the top leagues, whereas to really get the liquidity flowing through the entire betting ecosystem in the US, you need to be looking beyond just domestic content and more broadly. So absolutely, you can see that happening, and I think. But
what do you think has prevented it from happening in Europe?
In Europe, well, it depends where you're talking about specifically in Europe, but I suppose the disadvantage that potentially Europe has versus the States is the fact that you genuinely are talking about individual countries, whereas actually in the States, with a market as big as it is, you could potentially look at a scenario where there is liquidity across the whole country, which is obviously a very different scenario.
So essentially you're saying like the sort of like bifurcation or whatever of the market and then not having enough liquidity across different markets, or one market is the biggest hampering for it becoming like a larger sort of financial exchange.
I think that's it's a considerable barrier. I mean, massively. But then if you look at the States as it stands right now, there are so many barriers that exist legislatively. So they need to be overcome.
Yeah.
But one point has to be clear. I mean, I'm less naive thinking about recreational players or entertainment. Today, you have a market out there that is worth $20 billion, which is the legal market. If you want to see growth...
It's worth what?
They say 20 billion. There are numbers all over the place, obviously.
It's got to be worth a lot more than 20 billion. I was just talking to someone that
No, in
worked...
revenue, it's in revenue.
No, 20
in revenue.
No, in handles.
Yeah.
Who knows? But in terms of revenue, I mean, there are numbers out there that are completely different. But my point is that the opportunity, you were asking before, where you see the growth. The opportunity is taking that market and making it onshore. Period. That is the lowest hanging fruit that we have. Besides being creative and make our life more complicated, let's make sure we can tap into that addressable market, regulated, which is a win-win for everybody. It's a win-win for the state, it's a win-win for the ecosystem, for the player. And I believe leagues, regulators need to think more business-wise about the opportunity, which unfortunately they don't at this point in time, because it's already there, in any case, the regulated market.
Yeah, so I think this is the point you're making, and Sharon, I think you made this really well, which is just this idea that the more friction that regulators put in the system, specifically around things like an integrity fee or whatnot, the much smaller chance that this is ever going to really replace the black market, or we're going to be able to take money away from them. So, what would you guys suggest to regulators, as a way to foster innovation that allows? So I would agree with you on one side. Like, I don't like the idea that the innovation here or the TAM comes from like going after the existing market. Like, to me, you want to grow an industry, you want to innovate, because the problem is that innovation in sports betting is relatively non-existent when it comes to even just types of products that are offered over time, right?
Yeah.
Like a bet, even prop bets, everything, it's just very simple. And like the things that have evolved, and like I would love to see this industry be forced to evolve more to actually have real innovation that comes in. And obviously now that it's legal, there's a much greater chance of that. But I do worry, and maybe this is about sort of like this idea of regulators putting putting a lot of friction that will prohibit this from happening.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think the tax rates is a huge piece of it. On the innovation piece, though, I think when you look around the world of why there hasn't been innovation is it's a very rational transactional market around the world where it's about the offer, everyone's on the same technology stack. There's all these things that prohibit it versus here in this country, if we could start sliding glass doors, we see where the market went to. We start here with the consumer. What's the American consumer need? What are they excited about in terms of sports? And you start building based on customer needs, not which bet 50, get 50, offer. And having your own technology stack here will also differentiate, because everyone in Europe is pretty much on the same technology stack. So you launch one feature and then everybody has that feature. There's going to be differentiations here because this market's going to be so big. There'll be lots of really good competition, and it will force a lot of that innovation as well.
Yeah, look, I think the friction will get better over time. I mean, another friction point that people don't realize is like the big banks. A lot of the big banks don't allow credit card transactions, even if you're a legal and regulated operator, right? So credit cards work 50% of the time. That's real friction, right? You have to get through putting your social security number in and doing all these things to register. You know, credit card's the logical thing that we'd use to make your first deposit, and it works half the time. So I think those things will just get better over time as it becomes more prevalent. You know, but on the marketing side and the standing out, right, it's product innovation, and then it's just making it fun. I mean, we're doing stuff here that have never been done in the market. Like, we paid out on Alabama to win the national championship in football 30 days before the national championship game.
How'd that work out?
It worked out, you know, as we had actually hoped, because it created this big story and buzz and so on. We got a ton of PR, and then they lost. Right, we'd already paid it out. We probably got, I mean, I don't know what the multiples are in the PR value, and it became another story again, right? People got paid out in Alabama, they lost the game, you know, and right, it's just a way to get cut through.
I don't understand that. You paid out Alabama.
Yeah.
So I must not have been paying attention if you guys got all this good PR for it, because that seems ridiculous.
Yeah. Again, right, like you're thinking about, we're in
that,
this,
like, to me, makes me, and Kip and I are friends, so I'm about to attack him, but it's fine.
I knew it was going to happen.
But that makes me lose, so, like, I have zero credibility to, like, feel like your business is a real business when you're willing to take that big a hit for the PR and the marketing angle of it. And you're saying really that was more valuable to you than what you would have lost. And then I feel like, so did you end up having to pay out both sides of that bet then, right?
Correct. But look, it was 30 days before, right? So it's futures bets. So you'd imagine it's not as big a number.
So you didn't have that much volume.
Correct.
Got it.
Wasn't the week of with all the ones.
It wasn't the week of. It wasn't.
Money line.
You know, it was.
Right. I mean, did you guys do the analysis that, like, oh, this isn't going to be that big a deal because, like, these odds are so short anyways and whatnot, like?
100%. Yeah.
Got it.
Look,
okay, now I feel a little better about you as a businessman.
Trust me, yeah, we
Thank you.
we know what we're doing. I mean, it's stuff that we do in Europe all the time. But again, those are the things that actually will get cut through. You know, and by the way, as a result, like, we survey all the customers that are registering every day, right? And so we want to know where they're coming from. Are they people who have never bet before? Are they people who are betting offshore? Are they people who are just go to Vegas a couple times a year with their friends? And the percentage of people who have never bet before is growing, and the percentage of people who have historically bet on an offshore book is growing as well. And that's what we're trying to do.
Right. So let's go back to this idea of sort of like bookmaking and growing. You know, we have two people that work with bookmakers or work for bookmakers, William Hill and what do you guys go by officially? FanDuel? FanDuel. And there are philosophies in bookmaking around, you know, how you cater to your user base or what kind of customer base you want. Sharon, I know that you've mentioned recreational bettors, and William Hill has obviously gotten a lot of tough publicity since coming over to the US in not wanting winning bettors, right? Like, the notion is that you guys will kick out people just for winning. And I'm not saying that's correct, but that is a rumor that has been spread, or there have been articles written about that.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we can kind of go into sort of this idea of what is the best way to run a sports book.
Yeah. So let me be clear, it's not our publicity. We've been the victim of getting that reporting, which is not true. We do not kick out winners. When folks have not been allowed to play, there's a lot of other reasons that actually go into it, and there's so much more to the customer story. I think we were picked on a little bit because we're the largest bookmaker in Nevada and with the most amount of customers, so it's easier to get picked on, but that is not true. We actually do want people to win. As we were talking about, it is
Do you want them
fun.
to win consistently? Like, do you want to have people that you know are like a losing proposition
You
for
want happy, satisfied customers, and the analytics prove over time, we have a business. We're not a non-for-profit. Honestly, like, we're actually a public company, right? We're a business. But at the end of the day, you want happy, satisfied customers that have fun playing. And so I think that the industry is picking on this thing that's actually really not true and taking some random stories and putting it together. You do with recreational bettors, you want them to really enjoy it and to have fun with it. I mean, we
what about
operate
professional
two
bettors?
sports books here in Rhode Island, so you can imagine the Patriots. All the money was on the Patriots this year for the Super Bowl, right? And Rhode Island had a great experience with sports betting. And over time, we'll have a healthy business and fans will keep coming back. So I'm not sure it's a real thing of what is being...
Yeah, no, and I listen, we talked about this backstage. Like, there is a notion that you are a business, you have to make money, and you make money in the business model that you have. So you kept referencing recreational bettors. Do you feel that you guys can cater towards professional bettors, meaning long-term winners? Or is that not where you consider to be your customer?
I think we look at our segmentation so differently than that, right? It's not a matter of the recreational long-term. We want people to have a high player value. They play with us for a long period of time, and sometimes they win, and sometimes we win. And over time, you have a good business. But the most important thing is about the transparency and the authenticity of it. We offer fair odds. You know, for every other business, we offer a price. People pay that price or they don't. And there's nothing that's going on underneath or behind the curtain that we don't feel comfortable with. We want consumers to have a good time and have fun with sports betting.
How about you, Kip? Do you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I think we, as I said before, we cater to, all different types of players. We know that there are some players that may over time be net winners, and across the spectrum, right? And so, I think as long as we understand how our business is working and so on, we're comfortable with that. And look, there are also a lot of other reasons that I think get confused in this topic about why you might restrict somebody from betting, right? We have a huge obligation around responsible gambling, and so on. So I think the things get confused across the board. But yeah, look, we largely have a policy of we take money from just about everybody up to the point where we think that there's potentially a problem gambling issue to be aware of. So.
Doug, do you have any thoughts in terms of you as someone that is, obviously has covered gambling for quite some time, and you noted that you are a gambler yourself. Do you feel like this idea that, what we're representing on this point of view is that like there is no such thing as banning someone from a sports book for simply winning, and I know that's not true, right? I know that's not true. I'm not saying like William Hill or anyone specifically. I'm just saying like. Sports betting is notorious, like you'll see it all the time, that people have trouble getting money down. And the reason they do oftentimes is because they've done too well or they've won. And there is like if you read about it, there's a lot of models that they talk about. A very popular, well-respected sports book that's offshore called Pinnacle that allows a lot of, known, one of their slogans I think says winners welcome or something like that, because they're known for that. But it is definitely different, right? Because what we were talking, Matteo, you said the overall handle in New Jersey was around what last year? The hold percentage?
I think the DGE reported in January 4.5% was the hold.
Right. And I know that
5 and 6 in any case on average.
So Pinnacle, and across what kind of handle is that in New Jersey right now?
It was 385 million in January.
385 million, so pretty significant.
Yeah.
It's growing. That's good. Good for you guys. But what's interesting is, Pinnacle's hold percentage I know is much closer to 1%. It's much smaller, but their overall volume is pretty significant, right? So it's definitely a different model to go after, and there's a lot of risk associated with it. But I think it's just interesting because ultimately, the idea that it's hard to have this conversation without like some acknowledgement that. As a business model, like not catering to winning bettors is part of that business model, right? Like, and are you saying, Sharon, that that's not the case?
Just saying that there's so much more to the story, as Kip said too, of that.
Well, absolutely, right? And I'm sure it's totally,
it's
like a lot of it's been blown out of proportion and it's edge cases and whatnot. Yeah. I'm curious about it, and it's a little, like if I had a choice to have a business where I could make 1% or 4% sounds better to me, just because it's bigger.
I think there's a method to the madness to helping make that 1%. So the Pinnacle example, they have also narrower straddles, right? The juice isn't as high because they have the volume to offset it. To bring in that volume, they lower the juice, right? That my understanding?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of reasons they have that volume, right? One of the reasons is that they cater towards people that are putting a lot of money in their system, that they're not quite as afraid of being sharp or not.
And the reach,
right?
and obviously the volume. But like, if the U.S. were to copy that model in due time and had the volume over across many states, I would, if I were working at one of those operations, would want that professional money for that information, and I would have maybe lower limits and know the sharp side or whatever you want to call it. So I would say that the professional bettor money would help me have a higher hold percentage because you can use their bets to help.
Yeah, I mean that's the premise, and so it's an interesting discussion, but
they go hand in hand, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah,
they could go hand in hand. I should say.
Well, I would say it's a great sales pitch to the people in this audience, right, who came here, who are interested in getting into analytics in this industry. Look, we take money from people that we know are probably going to win over time because it's interesting data to plug into all the models we have that are setting the prices in the future, right? So,
yeah, but if people ask me like, should I start doing analytics in sports betting? I tell them no, because it's just too hard to get money down if you're winning. Like it's just that's the way it is. And I wonder if I had a hope that maybe legalization would change that, and I'm not sure if it will. It'll be interesting to see if we are able to, again, like going back to this whole idea of can we grow the overall pot as big as possible? Well, one of the ways to do that is allow everyone to bet, right? As long as they're not felons or whatever, or they're not cheating, and like, I completely get that. As long as they're just legally or doing the right thing, transacting, I think it's letting everyone play, right? Win or lose, and then figure out your business to leverage them, et cetera. Let's talk a little bit about the business that Matteo and Andrew, you guys are both in around data and whatnot. Like, what role or how did you guys look at the U.S. opening as an opportunity for you? Like, what excited you when you heard that was going to be the case?
I mean, the obvious starting point is a new market to work with. So, obviously we'd never worked in the market before. I mean, I think for us as a business, and I'm sure Matteo's similar. We have a lot of rights cleared in this market, both in relation to data, but also video. So although that's not particularly prevalent at the moment, a big chunk of our business is derived from providing live video on the front end of bookmakers' sites and mobile apps and stuff. So for us, obviously, we want to replicate that in the US, and that's a big opportunity for us across sports that we work with closely already. And then there's obviously an opportunity for us across domestic US sport as well. And so we've been part of the a forerunner in the conversations that we've been having with the leagues to try and access official rights as well. So from their competition. So, but it's interesting because actually, if you look at where we come from at this as a business, with a business where video is so prominent in terms of revenues, at this stage there is no right that's been granted to anyone for video provision in the domestic market from the big leagues, and I think that's unlikely to change in the short term. And so going back to the earlier point around betting on non-domestic sport, I think for us there's a big opportunity around that in the time across that vast period where there is no US sport and where actually in running markets and betting markets alongside video pictures, it could be very successful in this market.
Yeah, I mean, clearly this is for us is a tremendous opportunity. We've been in the US now for many years. We have over 400 people in the US. And we have official relationship with the leagues across the media and the sports betting spectrum. We just signed an important global deal with the MLB. We're the official distributor of the NBA data. We collect the data also on behalf of the NBA. We have, I believe, 90% market share in New Jersey in terms of data. Clearly, we see this as an amazing opportunity for us. And we are very much like Bloomberg for the financial market. So
wait, if I want to use the NBA feed, I have to go through you to get it now?
You have to go through me, yes.
Okay, and so that's different than how it is in Europe, right? In
yes.
terms of soccer and whatnot.
Well, there's a slight wrinkle in that because in the US, the NBA data is non-official, isn't it? Non-exclusive, sorry.
Excuse me?
The NBA data in the US is non-exclusive.
In the US, we have a market that basically we have few operators, but you need to go through one of these few operators that are offering NBA feeds. There is an official feed, and you can only use that feed if you are a bookmaker, and is distributed by few operators in the market at the moment.
And you're one of the operators?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do you think that, in that situation, we're beholden to you, right, to sort of like produce the best product for us to create things, correct?
To a certain extent, what we do, if you think about data, everybody say data is the new oil. We actually produce the fuel. We take the oil and we build products around this data, then we give to the bookmakers, which are the cars, so they can actually run their business. As I say, you can think about Bloomberg in the financial market. They power a lot of financial platforms with the data. We do exactly the same for sports betting operators. This is why the relationship with the leagues is so important, because we take basically all the data that they give us, which is not just the data of what is happening in the game, but to think about also the data of the players, live tracking data. And that is where I believe the new generation of prop bets and innovation will come. Having the ability to understand how the players are moving on the field, defining better products and better pricing. And so there is clearly at this point in time a very important codependency between the pricing that these guys are generating and what the leagues are giving as an information.
Got it. Recently, the Major League Baseball came out and talked about not wanting or requesting bookmakers to not allow betting on minor league games, with the statement basically that there was too much opportunity for decisions that had nothing to do with the game to influence the actual outcome. Sorry, not minor league games, spring training games. What do you guys, Sharon or Kip, do you guys have a take on that in terms of like how you feel about, did you listen to them? Did you guys meet about that and say, well, maybe we shouldn't do spring training, or were you?
Yeah, I mean, we've been doing, I think we did NFL preseason. We have been doing it. I think the important thing is we're generally aligned with their concerns, right? They aren't huge markets.
Do you think there are real concerns there?
Well, look, if you look at Europe and you're concerned about the integrity of it, like certainly there's more integrity issues at, lower division games, sort of long tail tennis matches and so on. So there is a higher probability that there could be an integrity issue with it. I understand that concern. That's factored into our, desire to take bets or not take bets on a market. We take that into consideration because, again, we're aligned. Like, if we think that there's a concern, we're not going to put it up. Because if somebody has inside information or there's a chance that they have inside information, it's not worth it for us to take bets on that market. So, look, I think we go as we see that it makes sense to take bets on, and obviously there's also the illegal market side of it too, which is right. If these are events that people are able to bet on the illegal market, again, that just becomes another impediment to bringing people over. So you have to be able to compete with that.
I think their concerns are very legitimate because that's how they feel. But I don't think they're as informed as maybe we are in this space. But if you look at what's going on across the United States with legalization, I think their obligation to their league and where their offices is to fear the worst, right? Whether it be the Tim Donaghy scandal or something along those lines. I didn't think that was possible until it all surfaced. So I think the leagues are doing their due diligence, and whereas we, at least myself, kind of laughed at the notion of spring training being taken off the board and concerns of that, but I'm not working in a league office where the potential is so severe and I can fear the worst. So I understand their concerns because they're not as knowledgeable as maybe people who've been in the betting space for a long time. I think they're in the information gathering phase of all this.
So you don't think there are any concerns about spring training games or preseason football? I
would not, but I also know that the limits are lower, and I would have to be, but I would not be concerned about that. I mean, we've seen, is it Al Leiter, former big league pitcher, go to Congress and talk about some ridiculous prop bet scenarios that would never occur in its current form. But again, they're learning about that. I don't think Al Leiter knows a ton about the betting space. So I think they're literally flushing out, doing worst case scenarios because they have such a visibility, being a major professional sports team or sports league in America.
Sharon, did you have any comment on this? Or?
Let's just say that I think, there's been concerns on whole different things over the years, but there hasn't really been a lot of integrity issues. It's been legal to sports bet in Nevada for a very long time, and you don't really see these issues. So I get the concern in a new market, and I love that everyone is being cautious in a new market, because again, the idea is transparency and keeping consumers safe. But the history hasn't proven itself that this is actually a really big issue.
So then do you guys all find the notion that the leagues need an integrity fee to be sort of silly?
No. I think that there's enough commercially viable options with the leagues that's a win-win on a sponsorship side, instead of getting some tax that's going to prevent something that hasn't proved itself that it's a problem. And I go back to that is going to really hurt us against the illegal bookmakers, and it's just not the best way forward.
It is silly.
Right. Yeah, you're saying it is silly.
I shook my head before you finished the question. So it's silly. Yeah, I agree.
It is silly, the tax. It's not silly the fact that the leagues should have integrity programs. Now, the way then the leagues negotiate...
But if they should have them, they should have had them all along, right? If they really think that's a concern. And there's a lot of pieces of integrity that we're talking about, right? Like, Anthony Davis not playing the second half of an NBA game, that seems not like the most integrity-ous, if that's a word, into whatever.
Is now.
You guys know what I'm saying.
Isn't that the first thing they should worry about versus like another Tim Donaghy scandal, which probably won't happen again because it's going to be so clear in people's minds that that's a real issue? Well, as I say, I think the market is somehow catching up with the industry standards since we are in a market that has been just regulated. So clearly, they should have maybe integrity programs in place a long time ago. Now that sports betting is regulated and is becoming more and more they say distributed and accessible even to casual players. I believe the leagues should have integrity programs to monitor the players, to monitor the referees, and using the technology that today is available and the data that today is available to identify potential issues. I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because, I've done a lot of work in data analytics in my life. And the idea of using data in a lot of these situations to find problems, I think is challenging, because I think you're going to get a lot of false positives also.
But I think also this is where it comes back to the bookmakers, because actually, these guys, if there's an integrity concern, they see it very really in terms of betting activity.
Right.
So it's not necessarily about analytics.
Just exposing that is a step in the right direction.
So where this all needs to get to ultimately is there needs to be collaboration between bookmakers and right holders, because actually that is the environment within which you get a proper integrity ecosystem and information flow, and that is what takes this market forward. And obviously there's a lot of friction between right holders and bookmakers for various reasons connected with fees and stuff, which which may or may not be termed an integrity fee or whatever. But ultimately, the right holders want their share of the US sports betting industry. The bookmakers want the same, but it's that collaborative environment which is going to be ultimately beneficial for integrity purposes and player protections.
And they're aligned. Like that's
yes,
the thing. They're both
exactly.
the same
Yes.
team in a sense.
Well, we've been offering integrity services since 2004, so since quite a long time, and we have reported over 8,000 cases of potential collusions, and 300 out of these cases was actually then there were actions taken by the leagues or by the gaming commission. So clearly, it's not a massive issue, but it's an issue. It's enough one in order really to
it's your business,
harm
right?
the
So you got to find something.
Well, I can tell you that many of these 300 players were actually fined or expelled completely from the league.
Were those typically like mainstream, or were they on the lower levels?
They typically are on the lower level.
So like a minor league basketball.
Yeah,
or
in tennis, typically it's an area, unfortunately, that is always at risk. But again, the issue is not where it happens. And now what is the sample, how big is the sample, it shouldn't happen. And you need to put in place everything in order to make sure it will not happen.
There's interesting question here. I'll throw it out to you guys. I think I know what the answer is going to be, but I'm going to ask it anyways. Is there a thought that convincing casual fans to gamble, which can be potentially addictive, unethical?
The responsibility piece is really, really important, like any industry, right? Whether it's spirits or anything else, is that we know how to be able to, it's a game to enjoy, and we know the signs when it's gotten to not be fun anymore. And we all, starting in this marketplace, need to be incredibly responsible players and be able to offer things like controls and cooling off periods. And when you're in retail, notice all of those signs. And so there's always going to be a danger in it, but it's up to us on the responsibility to keep consumers safe. And that is very different than the illegal bookmaking marketplace.
Okay. What about the idea of, someone mentioned the idea of like a recreational versus a professional sports book. In other words, catering to different people. And I guess we kind of have that already, where there are some that cater more towards professionals and some that cater more towards. Andrew, we were talking a little bit about some of these ideas, and you've mentioned this of some of the like large action that you see in non-U.S. sports, and how much the sort of like time windows can build interest in different sports. Did you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, look,
like almost like the tail wagging the dog in this case, where certain sports could become more popular because of gambling.
Yeah, and I think there's two sides to it. So there's a timing piece which we've talked about, and yeah, you know, Premier League's on right now. Not a lot else on, but I had a bet on that on the way down here, and La Liga. But also beyond the timing piece, which is very obvious, and if you just plot it out and just look at where the leagues play hour by hour and season by season, where there's huge gaps where actually just the MLB is on, for example, you can see the absolute necessity for non-domestic sport to fill that 24/7 schedule, particularly coming from different time zones. I think there's another layer on top of that, which is just some sports are just particularly good to bet on, and it's a kind of combination of the timing thing, but also the structure of racket sports like tennis, for example, where actually the timing of the points and the duration of the rallies and stuff lends itself superbly to in-running betting. So there's a big opportunity there, not just based on timing, but also just based on the sort of adaptability of a particular sport to betting. So I think that is a topic that doesn't really get too much discussion over here as part of the an understandable focus on the leagues, because that's where traditionally a lot of the cash out of the US has come from, out of the regulated market. But I think that's a topic that will get more coverage going forward.
I think we're really excited. We're obviously also in the horse racing business through our TVG business, and I think there's a huge opportunity for horse racing as sports betting, expands, because again, there's a horse race on in America every couple minutes, right? And so I think that there's a big opportunity for sort of a comeback. I mean, if you look at all of our global businesses across the Paddy Power Betfair businesses in Europe and our sports bet business in Australia, horse racing is the biggest sport for us by far. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm obviously optimistic, and we're in the business, and we're excited for it. But I do think sports betting opening up here creates a great opportunity for that sport.
I would think baseball is the biggest room to gain for the live betting market. Just the way the lag between LeBron James getting fouled and being able to bet on a live prop of whether he's going to make 0, 1, or 2 free throws. There's just not enough time. But I think the half inning break and being able to bet live that next half inning or maybe the rest of the game or whatever, because I don't think people have a lot of time to watch 3-hour games, but they'll have a beer, i.e. making a bet for the next half inning or the next 2 innings or the rest of the first 5 or whatever it is, pick it up in the 7th inning, make a bet the rest of the way. And baseball could use the spike in stimulation for fans. I think that, to me, without the metrics in front of me from behind the counter, that would seem like it's a great opportunity in the U.S. sports market.
Yeah, I completely agree. Yeah. I mean, we opened the sports book at the Meadowlands in New Jersey. I was there in August. We launched it in mid-July last year, and it was 10:30 at night. I brought a friend over, and there were lines at every window at 10:30 at night. And I was like, all the games are going on. What's going on? And our general manager was with me. He said, everybody's going up and they're betting the over-unders on runs every inning. So they run up, they wait till the inning ends, and then they go up to the window and place a bet for the next inning. So it's just baseball. I think it could be a
I think it's
real
going to
fun.
help other American sports too. I mean, I hope it helps the WNBA as well and get more interest for that league. And you also have the AFL and the AAF. Like, there's always a reason to be vested in the game, and I think it's going to grow a lot of the American sports as well.
On a fun sort of segue, this was the first year that people could legally bet on the Oscars. And we saw some sort of interesting things happen there. Specifically, an online rumor was spread about the best director, there being some prior knowledge of who the best director was, and his odds sort of fell because of that. How did you guys handle that situation?
Yeah.
You paid it out 2 months ago?
So with that, we had no preconceived notion that we were going to be allowed to take bets on the Oscars, and so we were excited when the regulators in New Jersey opened it up. It's not a huge business opportunity. It's more about doing something different, getting the PR value, making people aware. The director you're referring to was about 45-1 on the board. I think dropped all the way down to 5-1 because all of a sudden we saw a flood of activity coming in. We took it off the board. We sort of assessed it. I think there was a tweet by Darren Ravel that sort of exacerbated it, and we kind of assessed that. Probably if somebody had
stole that tweet from someone.
Probably if somebody had inside information, that Darren was not the first person on their list to let know.
Yeah.
And then we just decided, because it wasn't worth it at that point, we just left it off the board. But we were comfortable with the integrity of it. I mean, they have that on absolute lockdown, that information. So.
Yeah.
Sharon, did you guys have any issues with that, or?
Yeah, same thing. We took it down too. There just got to be this nervousness and conservative of being early in the game, and was conservative and took it down. But I think these kind of bets are so fun with low limits, just getting folks that wouldn't normally bet interested in betting. And back in the day, William Hill set the odds on who shot JR. Not very different than that. And I think there are going to be fun cultural things like that we're going to want to play in. And as long as the limits are low, it's just a chance to introduce people to the game.
This audience has no idea who JR is.
You made my day, thank you.
Forgot that.
We're obviously
Now I
now
feel
hopeful
old.
that the elections will be next. So.
Well, so this is actually
I think you're allowed to bet on that.
That's different.
I think,
So this is actually a really important thing I think we need to talk a little bit about, right? And I think we all agree that these types of prop bets are really fun, and they're marketing, and like there's no harm, no foul, that kind of thing. I think the challenge, and this is something, Doug, that you and I we were talking about off stage, is that a lot of writers, mainstream writers, don't understand that these aren't liquid markets, that these aren't really predictive markets. These are just fun prop bets, and because the odds are what they are, what responsibility do you think the media has to become much more educated about betting so they can cover it in a more meaningful, substantive way than sort of the way that it's been covered up until now? And congratulations on your new show. Doug's got a new show on ESPN that he's
ESPN has a
hosting.
new show, Daily Wager, starting a week from Monday, March 11th, 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN News, Monday through Friday. So
Check your local listings for time.
Right, exactly. So look, I mean, I think I'll come around to answering your question, but I think I've been in a lot of rundown meetings, whether it be SportsCenter or even earlier in my career prior to ESPN, just trying to figure out what's like the right show for the audience and what's the appetite of the audience. Like the night of the Super Bowl, it's pretty obvious you should probably lead with the highlights of the Super Bowl, right? But on every day, like for a national sports show, what do you do? Like SportsCenter producers have to figure out, because obviously the appetite for certain games is different in the Northeast, West Coast, South, throughout the course of the United States, obviously. So yesterday, would you lead with the Lakers and the new lineup and LeBron, and will they miss the playoffs? Or preview big college games with the bubble and March Madness around the corner? And there's just a way to kind of figure it all out, because there's so much sports going on all the time. If some hockey guy might score 6 goals in a game, where do you put that in the show if a lot of places aren't big hockey fans? But with that, sports betting has become an important component to that, right? What is the appetite of the generic sports consumer? Well, it's contextually. So we try to provide odds as a metric that provides context, like the Bryce Harper news. Once that's announced, what is Vegas saying about that? What does it mean? And trying to educate the viewer and serve the sports fan in that capacity, like we've always done, whether it be highlights, post-game sound inside the locker room. But the betting market is interesting and applicable, even if you're not a
but the Bryce Harper one is a perfect example, right? Because the Bryce Harper one is not a liquid market either, right? It's probably just small, like up a few places. They're not taking big bets on it.
But I'm not
it's not
saying,
the same
it's
as
not
saying
the Bryce
like,
Harper, which team is he going to choose? It's the reaction of once he chose the Phillies,
Okay.
what happened to the season win
Sure.
total, division odds,
Yep.
pennant odds, World Series odds, and then maybe by equivalent, what happened to the Nats and things like that. So you're right. The
problem with those though is that they're not two-sided markets, so they're not real markets.
Right, they're one-way markets, so you want to use reputable odds that aren't skewed, so to speak. But you have to say that when you present that information, you have to say it's a one-way bet, right? It's not a two-way bet. And you have to explain that what it means, and in baseball, one player is not going to significantly change the odds as maybe like LeBron choosing one team changes the season win total drastically. So all that's contextual, and you're right. I think, much like we were talking about, the leagues are learning as they go along and fearing the worst. I think there's media outlets that are learning as well. Even when I worked in Las Vegas, there were producers in Las Vegas newsrooms who did not know how to look up a point spread. And they weren't sports producers, but still, that's part of what your audience, your consumer and your target audience, like you have an obligation to do that. So I think media is, I can't speak for other outlets, but everybody's learning as they go along. Fortunately, we have a lot of people at ESPN who have been immersed in the space for a while, who won't make mistakes. But you're right, like the odds offshore of where Bryce Harper's going to choose, that's kind of in the same space as like the Oscar betting. And it's not a liquid market, and it's lower limits, I would imagine, and it's more fun, but that speaks to the entertainment concept that I was referring to earlier. I think there's a large entertainment component to this that everyone's trying to balance.
All right, I think that's all we have time for. I want to thank the panelists for tolerating me, so thank you guys.
Good job. Thank you very much.